The proceeding will start shortly.
For Nature and Climate Declaration. I call Derek Thomas to move the motion.
I move that this House has considered the Nature and Climate Declaration. Sir James, I'm not sure...
Order. This is the second week when people keep addressing us Sir James. Unfortunately, Her Majesty has not found...
sorry.
I am just a Mr. Gray, if that's all right.
Sorry.
That's all saying.
Well, I was exceeding my area of responsibility. Mr. Gray. I'm not sure that I've brought any subject to this House unless I've been petitioned by constituents, and in this instance, by many of my constituents and many town and parish councils who have urged me to raise the issue of nature and climate, and have been particularly keen to secure my backing for the Nature and Climate Declaration. And I could not know for sure what my fellow parliamentarians got up to over the weekend, but I suspect that many of us attended church services in our constituencies to mark the beginning of COP27. I was pleased to join members of the congregation at Madron Church on Saturday afternoon as the church bells were rung out to welcome COP27. The service began with a reading of an old and simple psalm. The heaven are yours, the earth also are yours, the world and all that is in it, you have founded them. And it seems to me that this is a helpful reminder that we are simply caretakers and guardians of the planet we are so fortunate to live on. Can I thank you, Mr. Gray, for the opportunity to bring this debate to this House at a time when the UN nations are meeting in Egypt for COP27. I'm very pleased to contribute in some small way in the effort to get back on track on the road to net zero following the severe disruption of the COVID pandemic itself, the race to build back after the pandemic, and then the current devastating impact of Russia's evil war against Ukraine and the resulting global crisis in energy and food security. And this debate and the declaration itself supports efforts to deliver on a commitment we in the Paris Agreement ratified in 2016. We committed to, and I quote, to affirm the importance of education, training, public awareness, public participation, public access to information and cooperation at all levels on the matters addressed in this agreement. So can I thank the 0 Hour team who have built up support for the Nature and Climate Declaration over the past month. I particularly want to thank Ron, who's not here today due to traffic and transport difficulties, but also to thank Amy and Oliver, who are here, who have been such a pleasure to work with, and their hard graft prepared the ground for the launch of the Nature and Climate Declaration that took place in this place last week. This is democracy, Mr. Gray, at its best. I say this because the Nature and Climate Declaration has been signed by close to 2,000 UK politicians from all parties, including over 1,500 councillors. The first of its kind, this all-party declaration, has been signed by councillors, elected mayors, peers, MPs, and members of the devolved Parliament and assemblies. The declaration recognises and supports the UK government efforts on climate change and biodiversity. It also recommends that the UK government deals with what it calls the critical environmental risks to Britain's heritage, communities and future prosperities by three things: fulfilling our fair share of emissions reductions to 1.5 degrees Celsius, reversing nature loss by 2030, delivering an integrated environmental protection and decarbonisation plan. There are a number of reasons why I take this issue and this declaration itself seriously, not least because all three recommendations are in line with UK government policy and should there be welcomed and accepted by the Minister. British citizens understand that there needs to be a shift towards a healthier, greener way of life. In fact, when I stood for election in 2019, that was what I stood on, to work for a healthier and greener West Cornwall. But they recognise this needs to be achieved both at home and abroad, and we all recognise that we have a part to play. The problem is that net zero and 2050 are not expressions that particularly resonate with the average human being. Although most want to treat the planet better than we do now, and few would deny the sizable benefits for everyone if we focus a little more on what nature recovery actually looks like and how efforts to decarbonise will improve day-to-day living. In recent years, Government and Parliament has made great strides in getting to grips with the sheer challenge and opportunity of delivering on environmental protection and decarbonisation, but we have failed to clearly articulate what this means for our constituents. We get too hung up on what we mean by net zero by 2050, and don't talk nearly enough about the positive benefits of improving our homes, creating skills to do this work and skills in farming and clean energy. We don't talk nearly enough about how important farms are for food production that enhances nature and captures carbon. We don't talk nearly enough about how energy can be secure and affordable if we use the natural resource such as heat underground, the sun, the wind and tide to generate it. And this is where I want to briefly concentrate my thoughts, because delivering on these 3 recommendations in the declaration is not to inflict hardship and some sort of straitjacket on our constituencies and our communities, but rather to deliver in real terms levelling up in skills, health equality, food and energy security, mental well-being, knowledge and educational attainment. Please allow me, Mr. Gray, to set out how integrating environmental protections and decarbonisation delivers these public benefits. For example, to date, as we have debated net zero, we have tended to alienate farmers, somehow blaming them for our carbon footprint and loss of biodiversity. And I agree that, as we have hungered for cheap food over recent decades, we have done so at the expense of the natural environment. But I know from visiting farms in West Cornwall that food production, enhancing the natural environment and decarbonisation cannot just be done in harmony, but is mutually dependent. There is not time to go into the full detail now, but the use of herbal leys, tree planting, cattle grazing has led to enriched biodiversity, improved soil health and reduced runoff. Farms that work with nature have immense potential for productivity, high-quality food, while securing resilience in the landscape and creating a robust environment to cope better with climate change. Farming with nature can reduce reliance on imported inputs, can rebuild biodiversity, creating habitats and space for nature at scale. Farming with nature builds complexity and diversity in denuded farmland that can sequester vast amounts of carbon and create opportunities for education, community and social recovery. There has been considerable debate recently about food security and about the government's intention in relation to the Environmental Land Management Scheme, ELMS. But for what it's worth, Mr. Gray, I would fully support the government if it decided to channel far greater share of ELMS towards our farms to support food production, environmental health, environmental protection, decarbonisation and food security. But there are other ways to rapidly increase environmental protection and decarbonisation hand in hand. For example, there is an ambition to ramp up clean energy and clean heating, as we heard from the Prime Minister at PMQs this lunchtime. Cornwall is fast becoming known for geothermal, which has a potential for generating energy for Britain's homes. Sadly, due to the way that government organises its CFD auction, emerging renewable energy technologies such as geothermal and to a point floating offshore wind, these technologies are not getting a fighting chance. I'm aware that those developing the geothermal potential have submitted written evidence to the government's recent call for evidence, suggesting avenues for supporting geothermal, including a new deep geothermal renewable heat incentive, a ring-fence pot for geothermal in CFD AR5, and significant reform to the current planning process. And I'm hopeful that BEIS will look very carefully at the case being made for these emerging renewable technologies. Cornwall is also leading the way, leading on community ground source heating. Kenza, a world-leading Cornish company, has now completed ground array installations for the first private retrofit street. Residents will benefit from low-cost ground source heating with no need for gas or oil to their properties. And I'm privileged, as many of us are, in our jobs to see all sorts of examples of how we can integrate environment protection with decarbonisation. And I focus particularly on food and energy because this is where the pressure on households is today. I couldn't tell you, Mr. Gray, how keen farmers and businesses in my constituency are to access support to clad their barns, warehouses and workshops with solar panels and install battery storage. Take, for example, Penzance Dry Dock, which is also represented this afternoon. The UK's oldest working dry dock but involved in building and retrofitting ships and boats for modern maritime demands. This is an energy-intensive industry that looks to government to enable clean energy solutions on their buildings and within their workshops. And the government has nothing to fear from this declaration. Our communities are ahead of us in many ways. Take, for example, Penzance Town Council, who recently committed to the Future Generations Pledge, ensuring that every decision that is made at every level passes the good ancestor test. For example, how does this decision benefit our children's children and make their lives at least as good as our own? There is so much I'd like to include, but to conclude, I don't get any impression that the government lacks ambition or commitment in this area. My friend, the Prime Minister, said as much on Monday at COP27 and reiterated in the Chamber this afternoon. The world came together in Glasgow with one last chance to create a plan that would limit global temperature rises to 1.5 degrees. By honouring this pledge we made in Glasgow, we can turn our struggle against climate change into a global mission for new jobs and clean growth. And we can bequeath to our children a greener planet and a more prosperous future. That's a legacy we could be proud of. However, the UK government is rightly under pressure to deliver on its own commitments and assurances. It would be remiss of me, Mr Gray, to not refer to the fact that the government missed its own deadline in relation to publishing the legally binding targets required of the Environment Act. And so could the Minister, if she has the opportunity, with the opportunity she's got, give some indication of when we can expect to see these targets published? Another frustration in this place for members is that government departments do not necessarily work together towards the same goals. The Committee on Climate Change has been instrumental in highlighting this and setting targets for each department. However, still we recognise that a risk to achieving environmental protection and decarbonisation is the risk to it is inconsistency across government. I've suggested, I will certainly, yes.
I thank him for being right. I think he's touching on a very crucial point, and that is the delivery of our targets is not on track. And what we are missing is a coordination within government. Is it not time we are bringing back the Department for Energy and Climate Change in order to coordinate the delivery of our net zero targets?
Derek Thomas.
We have the committee in number 10 that is doing that job, but I would accept that. Lord Devon spoke on Radio 4 last week as I was driving back to Cornwall to say that actually we have some of the best targets, the world-leading targets, but we are lagging in delivering on them. And as I hinted in relation to offshore wind, which affects the Celtic Sea, Cornwall, Devon and Wales in particular, and also the challenges around geothermal and new technologies, we do need that cross-government work to make sure that there's nothing standing in the way for no good reason. So it'd be great if the Minister could outline what joint departmental work, possibly to answer the intervention there, is taking place, especially between BEIS and DEFRA on these intertwined issues. And finally, before I conclude properly, Mr Gray, would the Minister meet with me and the team from Zero Hour and other colleagues who are very interested in this place? Because there's so much that we can do to support the government and across this House to deliver what we have committed to delivering, but also to, as we pledged in the Paris Agreement, to inform, to improve the way we inform and take the public with us. There's a real opportunity to really take the public with us in a way that they can see the positives of what I've hoped to set out this afternoon very briefly. So in conclusion, Mr Gray, this declaration gives us a renewed opportunity to commit to working together to achieve what we all know is fundamental to our constituents in relation to skills, health equality, food and energy security, mental well-being and knowledge. It is the least they deserve from their elected representatives. Thank you, Mr Gray.
This House has considered government support for nature and climate declaration. Mark Greenwood.
Thank you, Mr Gray, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship this afternoon. Congratulate the Honourable Member for St Ives for securing this incredibly important debate, and I was very interested to hear about what's happening in his constituency in this regard. As we all know, the need to act on climate change is extremely urgent. Extreme weather events over the summer saw the UK endure record temperatures of over 40 degrees Celsius for the first time, something that the Met Office described as virtually impossible without human-induced climate change. Recently, the Joint Committee on the National Security Strategy urged the government to get a grip on the major national security risks posed by the effects of climate change on critical national infrastructure such as power, transport, water and communications. The note reported an extreme weakness at the centre of government when it comes to tackling climate change. Earlier this week at COP27, the UN Secretary-General gave a stark warning that humanity is on what he called a highway to climate hell with our foot on the accelerator, saying that we were in the fight of our lives and we are losing, and our planet is fast approaching tipping points that will make climate chaos irreversible. So with this in mind, it is disappointing that the Prime Minister saw COP27 as something of an afterthought and initially decided not to attend, only to be shamed into then a U-turn. Nonetheless, he did go, so, that was something. But it was very disappointing that he had to be sort of forced to go there, because it is just so vital that the government now addresses the climate emergency with real urgency. And I note the Prime Minister's statement in the House today, but I would point out to the Minister, and I'd like her to respond on the points I'm going to make, that there are glaring inconsistencies in his current position. So as Chancellor, the now Prime Minister, it was his energy profits levy which allowed energy companies to shield 91 pence of every £1 of their profits from that levy by investing their profits in fossil fuel extraction. Now, the promotion of fossil fuel extraction instead of investment in renewables is irresponsible as we face the climate emergency, and I believe it's an insult to young people in particular and to future generations. And of course, in addition to that, the Prime Minister is still committed to the ban on onshore wind, which again makes no sense given the urgency of the emergency that we face. I was proud to support the Labour motion in May 2019, which led to this Parliament, the UK Parliament, being the first in the world to declare an environment and climate emergency. And it was incredibly disappointing that Conservative members abstained on that vote. Labour's Green Prosperity Plan would establish a National Wealth Fund and GB Energy, a publicly owned energy company, to invest in the technologies of the future. This would create 1 million new jobs in towns and cities in every corner of the country, as well as bringing down energy bills, raising living standards and ensuring Britain shows global leadership in tackling the climate crisis. Labour also has a clear plan to insulate 19 million homes across the country to help cut people's energy bills and to cut emissions. Home insulation rates and energy-efficient upgrades have plummeted since the Conservative Party took office over 10 years ago. Why have Conservative governments decided to slow down on home insulation? We need to see a reversal of this, and I urge the Minister to set out today what plans they have to get the UK insulated. I would like to pay tribute to the Cool Places of Worship programme in Wirral, through which places of worship are taking action on climate change as part of Cool 2, which is Wirral's climate change strategy. And this includes West Kirby United Reformed Church in my constituency, who are doing some really interesting and exciting work on this. I'd like to congratulate them on their recent event to share knowledge about how people can improve the insulation of their homes and tackle climate change, because, of course, it is of incredible importance that that kind of that expert information is shared with people. Recent research by Energy and Climate Intelligence Unit found that poorly insulated homes will have to pay almost £1,000 more than others on their energy bills this winter on average. So why isn't the government insulating homes on the scale that Labour has outlined? The Nature and Climate Declaration that has been put forward by the campaign group 0 Hours calls for the government to make sure that the UK fulfils our fair share of emissions reductions to ensure that the global temperature increase will not exceed 1.5 degrees. The government's own net zero strategy of October 2021 points to a report by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which shows that if we fail to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees C, floods and fires will get more frequent and more fierce, crops will be more likely to fail, and sea levels will rise, driving mass migration as millions are forced from their homes. Above 1.5 degrees, we risk reaching climatic tipping point, meaning we could lose control of our climate for good. So what does the government intend to do to ensure that the UK plays its part in doing all we can to keep below 1.5? And now I'd like to turn to the attack on nature, and I would pay tribute to the campaign by the RSPB on this. We know that there's an urgent need to protect and restore nature. As the RSPB have said, We need immediate action from the UK government to halt the plans which threaten our water, air, beaches and rivers. Nature cannot wait. We need the UK government to halt their attack on nature now. The CEO of the RSPB has said that, and I quote, "This is not the time to be pushing forward with destructive legislation that will remove vital wildlife protections and threaten nature's recovery." She has called for the retained EU law bill to be stopped right now, for an end to the attack on nature, and for the Prime Minister to set out an ambitious plan for tackling the nature and climate emergency. And she's absolutely right. The wildlife trusts have also raised serious concerns that through the retained EU law bill, we could see the loss of important protections for nature, including the habitat regulations, and the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill will soon be returning to the Commons, bringing with it further risks to environmental protections. The government has an immense responsibility in the face of the climate emergency and environmental breakdown that we are experiencing, and I call on the government to bring forward a bold and urgent plan to address the climate emergency and to change course and drop its attack on nature.
If you're standing up, Robin Walker.
Thank you, Mr Gray. I congratulate my honourable friend St Ives on securing this debate. Like him, I've been urged by constituents to show my support for this declaration, and like him, I welcome the strong support that we've seen from church groups. Just a couple of weeks ago, I was at Worcester Cathedral meeting with the cathedral's eco group, who were holding a fantastic green fair at which they were showcasing ideas for sustainable living, green skills and education, as well as better ways of dealing with food and energy waste. The declaration that we are debating today mentions, and he mentioned in his speech, the importance of education and training. And as during my all too brief period as schools minister, I was very proud to put the COP26 Education Ministers meeting on the agenda of the International Forum for the Teaching Profession. To make sure that we had attendance at that. I was very proud to introduce the Natural History GCSE, which I know had cross-party support in this House, as I was very strongly urged to do by pupils in Nunnery Wood High School and Stanley Road Primary School in my constituency. I contributed to the Department for Education's Sustainability and Climate Change strategy, and was great to stand alongside my right honourable friend for Stratford-on-Avon and indeed Bear Grylls at the Natural History Museum for the launch of that strategy. I took the opportunity to visit schools that were providing strong environmental education, schools such as the North Worcester Primary Academy in my constituency, part of the Rivers Map, which has rewritten its entire curriculum to be built around the Sustainable Development Goals, something which I think is well worth others looking at and learning for. Today we've had the Prime Minister's statement on COP27, showing that I think the UK continues to lead actively in this space. And I was pleased to hear him say there is no solution to climate change without protecting and nurturing nature. I think that's got to be right, and I think we understand that in the Link Declaration that we are debating today. I think it is vital that we protect the natural environment, both in terms of the global natural environment. Some of the work that the UK has done to protect our oceans is world-leading, but also in terms of our domestic natural environment, campaigning against litter in all of our constituencies, campaigning to support biodiversity, and of course making sure that the UK reaches the highest environmental standards. I was very pleased when my honourable friend for Taunton announced that the Office for Environmental Protection would be coming to Worcester and would be headquartered in my constituency. In fact, it's going to be headquartered in a location very close to the Worcester Woods, a fantastic area which preserves the natural environment. And although at the time the Labour frontbench decried that decision to locate this institution in Worcester, I hope by now that they've come to change their mind and realise, as certainly I and Glenys Stacey have recognised, that Worcester is an excellent location. We, of course, are a city that has its fair share of flood risk, and so we're very aware of the impact of climate change on flooding and the importance of nature and the natural environment in actually avoiding flooding, both in terms of trees and the important work that trees can do, particularly when they're planted in some of the upland areas that affect flooding on the River Severn, but also in terms of high-quality soil. And I remember on a visit with the Worcestershire Wildlife Trust discussing the importance of soil porosity, which is supported by healthy live soil, to avoiding flooding. On that issue, I do urge the government, as I did in DEFRA questions a couple of weeks ago, to continue to engage with the wildlife trusts on the future of elms and support biodiversity for a strong British agriculture policy, which should play to some of the unique assets of our country, such as its hedgerows and its ancient and native woodlands. I'm very proud of some of the work that's being undertaken in my constituency by the so-called WEDGE, the Worcester Environment Group, which works with Worcester City Council and our county to support more biodiverse verges and roundabouts and to create a fantastic new nature trail which is linking up Worcester's primary schools with a circuit of green lanes, taking in some of the city's oases of green space and areas for outdoor activity. I want to praise the work of all those in my urban constituency who helped to create space for nature and think about how to support biodiversity. And I was pleased to hear the Prime Minister in today's PMQs talking about the opportunities of offshore floating wind. I believe that alongside wider investment in renewables, in nuclear, which is a low-carbon technology, and in hydrogen technology, this can play a very important part in our journey to achieve net zero. I agree with the Honourable Lady from Wirral West that we need to do more on insulation. And it was actually one of the reasons why in both the last two leadership campaigns I supported my right honourable friend for Richmond as candidate, because he spoke about that during those debates and spoke about the importance of doing more on insulation. I hope that the government that he leads will come forward with more measures on that front. The one final thing I want to say is I think we need to be careful as we pursue, quite rightly, the green technologies of the future, but we do so in a clear-headed way, which will allow our constituents to afford their energy bills and to heat their homes effectively. I am concerned at some of the policies that the government has set out previously to encourage complete electrification of heating, when we all know that many of our constituents live in homes that are not yet energy efficient enough to be effectively heated by electric heating and by things like heat pumps. I perhaps declare a constituency interest in representing one of the largest boiler manufacturers in the country, but I hope that the government will explore carefully the opportunities for zero-carbon technologies to heat with gas, such as the potential of hydrogen for heating, because I do think that could be an important part of the mix if we want to both keep our constituents' homes warm and move towards net zero.
Thank you, Mr. Gray, and it is a pleasure to serve with you in the chair. I want to thank the Honourable Member for St Ives for securing this debate and for setting the scene of this very crucial debate this afternoon. Mr. Gray, I hope you will forgive me if I'm quoting again what Antonio Guterres has said this week. We are on the highway to climate hell with a foot still on the accelerator. The world is on course to reach 2.8 degrees of heating by the end of this century. Without action now, the 1.5 degree target is unreachable. And complacency, Mr. Gray, is, I think, now the biggest danger we are facing. Unfortunately, the UK government is not acting with the urgency that we need. We are setting a lot of targets, we're having lots of plans, but we don't deliver on them. The government has proven themselves to be climate delayers or climate action delayers. When the new Prime Minister was Chancellor, he cut air passenger duty on domestic flights. He introduced a windfall tax that incentivized firms to invest in fossil fuel extraction. And our Prime Minister had to be dragged to the COP27 summit this week. And when he was asked only today whether he would actually lift the de facto veto on onshore wind, he did not answer the question. And, Mr. Gray, that really poses the question, what is this government about? And we've just heard, we need to find solutions that are actually affordable. The most affordable solution for renewables is onshore wind, not nuclear. We have heard last week that Sizewell C might actually be scrapped because it's too expensive. So if the government was really serious about, A, investing in renewables, and B, doing it cheaply, onshore wind surely is the most obvious solution. And this really blindfold that I see from the Conservative benches is beyond understanding for me. The climate emergency is not a problem for future generations. It is having an material impact on people now. We have seen extreme weather events cause suffering, conflict, and destruction around the world, from droughts in East Africa to bushfires in Australia. If we exceed 1.5 degrees, floods and fires will become more frequent and intense. Crops are more likely to fail, and millions will be driven from their homes. And Mr. Gray, some